This happened when I was 11. I have an older brother who was 16 at the time and two younger brothers. My parents would often go out for dinner on a Friday and leave us at home with some hired videos, pizza, and my brother in charge. My brother would often leave to his friend's place down the road on the same street and then leave me in charge. I liked this because I liked being in charge and got to choose the movies. This Friday night it was stormy and raining on and off. There was some lightning and thunder around. I was watching a movie, and my two brothers were playing in the garage. It was a large, open-plan space where you could fit 4 cars, and because Mom and Dad were out, you could skateboard, ride a bike, and do all sorts of things. Standing in our garage to the left was a park, and we had no neighbors on this side, so you'd often see people using the footpath for walking their dogs, riding or running into the night as there were some half-decent street lamps dotted along it. If you went out our driveway, you could go straight into the park. It was a great place to grow up. This night my brother was on the road as usual, and had written his friend's number down and left us to it. I was probably into our second movie for the night, when my two younger brothers ran in and said a man is watching them from the park near our fence. Normally I'd think they were playing a joke, but their faces had that different, concerned look, so I thought I'd better come have a look. We head back out to the garage, standing in the doorway, looking out towards the park. There's no sign of him, but there's a lightning flash, and it lights up enough just outside of the garage that we see the man my brothers saw is now standing in our yard, watching us. We all screamed, slammed the door, and ran to Mom and Dad's room. We locked the door, grabbed their phone, and ran a cord from the phone into the bathroom, locking that door. We called my brother's friend's house. His friend answered, and I told him there's a man in our yard. He yelled out to my brother and then said they are coming up on their BMX bikes. The wait was probably not even 5 minutes, but it felt like ages. When they left, my brother told his friend's parents, and they called the police and came up as well. We came back out of the house when they arrived, calling out to us. When they arrived, they said the man was gone. Soon after, the police arrived, and then another vehicle went up through the park. It was sort of a scary night, but the police searched our house for us and the yard, the streets, and the park, and it seemed pretty reassuring at the time. To me, my big brother was fearless and always looked out for us, so having him back home was just as reassuring as the police being there. My parents arrived home not long after, with 2 police cars at our house and the neighbors in the driveway, and my brother's friend's parents were there as well. This was not during the time of mobile phones, so I'm thinking what they were wondering had happened as they came into our driveway with their hearts racing. I don't recall hearing that the man was ever found or caught. Years later, when I moved out and my younger brothers took over my room, my dad told me one night my younger brother woke my mom and dad, white as a ghost, and said a man was standing at his window. The man woke him up saying, "Hey boy, are your parents home?" My parents never told any of us that at the time, but the timeline fit with them changing the real big open window fly screen. We also had to glass louvres with metal anti-break-in bars. This story takes place in August of 2013, in the mountains of southern Oregon. I am a USAF Security Forces airman, military policeman. My girlfriend was at work, and as a swelteringly hot day began to turn into thunderstorms, my buddy Nick, another military cop, and I decided to go explore some back roads and get out of the heat in town. Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used and many totally forgotten and grown over. Nick and I spent many of our days off starting on roads that we knew, finding roads we didn't know, driving for hours into the mountains, eventually navigating back to paved roads. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road we had never been on and began the drive into the mountains. After driving for around an hour, we hadn't seen nor heard any signs of other people in the woods. We rounded a bend in the thick fir woods and emerged in a meadow that was totally surrounded by thick aspen groves. The meadow was perfectly flat and eerily still. We both noticed the strange stillness almost immediately. No birds, hardly any insect noise, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. The table was very odd, however. It was painted a bright orange and was much larger than a typical picnic table in a park. Remarking on this, Nick drove through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The overall silence of the aspen grove was unsettling. Also, it was nearly impossible to see far into the trees as aspens grow extremely close together. When we parked by the table, I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to check it out. I'm not very tall, only about 5'5". Regardless, the table was ridiculously oversized and practically unusable. The seats were nearly at chest level, meaning I would have to climb up to even sit on them. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed he was looking back into the aspens. At first I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place in the thick trees. A small one-man tent was set back in the trees about 50 feet from the strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread, and felt certain that there was someone in the tent, and if we could see the tent, they could see us. There were no campgrounds in this area, no people, no main roads for miles. Surely someone camping so remotely would be at the very least a strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it. Nick suggested I call out. I didn't want to, but I did. "Hey, anyone in there?" I yelled. No reply. Feeling completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area. But we began to fear the worst. What if there was a body in the tent? What if somebody had gotten kidnapped? Foolish, I know, but we thought it all the same. After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the camp. Should we need to leave in a hurry? He would be waiting behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I started walking through the trees towards the tent. I was totally keyed up with my senses on full alert. When I reached the campsite, several things struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered all over. No fire had been built, no wood collected. The tent was literally full of backpacks and women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned to leave and tell Nick what I had seen. As I left, I heard Nick start yelling, "Let's go, let's get the heck out of here." Not knowing why he was yelling, I ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I saw a beat-up old Ford Taurus on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leapt into the passenger seat, and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by 2 men. A third person was laying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempted to block us from the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way we had come from. I looked back and saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick drove like a madman, and though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we hit the highway without seeing the car again. I still do not know if the person in the back was male or female. I called the state police and they promised to send a trooper out to check out the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper stating that the campsite, the backpacks, and the women's clothing were all gone, though he could tell people had been in the area. The strange table was still by the thick aspen grove. I have not returned to the area and do not intend to. Last year, a friend, let's call her Julie, and I decided to go backpacking in a North Carolina section of the Appalachian Mountains. It was a relatively remote mountain trail with a Boy Scouts camp at the base. We were planning on hiking the length of the trail, from one side of the mountain to the other, which was supposed to take about 4 days. We drove separately to the mountain, and Julie beat me to the parking area of the trail, which consisted of a dirt road right next to a creek. There were 3 other cars parked, including hers. I met up with her, and we started hiking up the approximately 3,000 feet to the summit at around 3 p.m. I had backpacked 2 times before and camped about 3 times before this. I was pretty young each time, and someone else was in charge of researching the area we were in, basically checking the weather for the time we'd be there and what the camping area was like. But this time, I was the one who had decided where to hike. I didn't look at the weather or what was going on with the trail at the time, just that it looked beautiful and like a fun trek. Well, Julie was quite experienced with backpacking. She used to work for a company that led school kids on Appalachian trail trips and was the reason I trusted her as my backpacking partner. She had looked up the weather and the status of the trail. Apparently, we were in for thunderstorms for the week. On top of that, the accomplice in an unresolved homicide case was last seen on this trail. Stupidly, I wasn't too put off by this. As we hiked up the mountain, we passed what I now know were the owners of the other cars in the parking lot at the base of the trail. A woman and a man who were walking their adorable dog, a man with a fully equipped backpack, and another man who had hiking sticks and seemed to just be out for a day hike. At around 5 p.m., we were exhausted because the trail was pretty much straight up. We found ourselves in a relatively open area close to the summit and decided to set up camp. Despite the area being cleared, No one was around besides a few campfires that had been there for a while because the last rains had been about a week ago. So we set our tents up, then went to find firewood. Well, 20 feet up the mountain from our camp, there was an apparently abandoned tent. We ignored it at first because we didn't want to be rude. Eventually, we realized that there was no one else around. I decided to look inside the otherwise pristine tent. The rainfly wasn't on, so I peered inside one of the ventilation flaps. Inside was a wet sock, 3 Cliff Bar wrappers, and an unused condom. Weird, but no one was around, so we ignored it. We ate dinner, tied our bear bag, and went to sleep. As soon as I zipped my tent door closed, rain started to fall. I'm not going to lie. I'm not the most acclimated to sleeping on a flat, hard surface, so my night was characterized by periodic moments of restlessness to readjust. It was pitch black, so it was difficult to determine whether I was dreaming or awake. During the night, I thought I heard 2 people come up the trail from the direction Julie and I had come. They stopped about 10 feet away from our campsite, whispered to each other. Then one of them walked through our camp. The next morning I woke up, surprisingly well rested. As we were eating breakfast, I told Julie about my dream. She told me it couldn't have been a dream because she experienced the same thing. That's when I noticed the footprints through our camp. Naturally, we went to the location of the mysterious tent from the day before. It was still there. Well, we continued our hike to the summit in the rain that hadn't stopped from the night before. The summit's portion of the trail was impassable due to overgrowth, so we went back to our cars and left. All I'm left wondering is why 2 people would hike up 2,900 feet of difficult trail in the pitch blackness of night without flashlights.